Good morning, 7th grade. Good morning, Mrs. Bailey. Good morning, Mrs. Lucas. Thanks for letting me be part of your book club launch today. I'd like to recommend two titles to you, either of which I think would make a great choice for a Middle Ages book club. The first one is called A Proud Taste for Scarlet and Miniver, and it's by E.L. Konigsberg. She wrote The View from Saturday, and she wrote From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, so you may have read one or both of those books. This book is about a historical character. It's about a woman named Eleanor who was born in 1122, and she lived until 1204. When she was 15 years old, so just a little bit older than you, she inherited a piece of land called the Aquitaine in France. And this was a very valuable piece of land, and the fact that she was now Eleanor of Aquitaine made her very desirable to some powerful men who wanted to add the Aquitaine to their kingdoms. She married first King Louis of France, and then later in life she married Henry II of England. She had a number of children by both men, and some of those children went on to become kings of England themselves. During her life, she was very adventurous. She went on a crusade, which is very unusual for a woman, and she loved colors and music and poetry, and she was a very headstrong and feisty woman, very willful, and that's her tomb. I think that's cool. And the story that Konigsberg has written, interestingly enough, begins after she has died, and she's up in heaven after serving some time in hell for a few things. She gets up to heaven, and she has to wait for many hundreds of years for her husband Henry to be allowed to come up, which is the way they talk about it in the book. And so at the beginning of the book, she's sitting there on a cloud with a couple of her friends from when she was on Earth, and they're waiting for the big day when Henry is allowed to come up to heaven. So I'm going to read you just a couple of paragraphs about Eleanor as E.L. Konigsberg describes her. It had taken Eleanor almost 500 years to catch up on the 200 she had missed while she was in hell. She often thought that the worst thing about time spent in hell is that a person has no way of knowing what is happening on Earth. In heaven, at least one could watch, even if one could not participate. Only saints and angels were allowed to interfere in earthly affairs. Everyone in heaven had periods of earth time about which they knew nothing. Everyone except the saints. They always came up immediately following death, and of course, heaven had always been home to the angels. But saints were hardly the people to contact when you wanted to catch up on the news. Most of them had been more concerned with heaven than with earth, even during their lifetimes, and now it was almost impossible to move them even a whisper away from the angels. Eleanor turned around, looking toward the night side of Earth. Perhaps she could spot an outdoor movie screen. Watching that would help her pass the minutes. As she turned her face toward the night and her back toward the two people waiting with her, she spotted Abbot Suger. Eleanor called to him, and the good abbot stopped to rest at her side. "Haven't seen you in a long while, Abbot," she said. "Oh," he answered, "I was over at admissions. They just let an English teacher up, and he made a beeline for Shakespeare." "They all do." "Yes, I know," the abbot chuckled, "but I like to watch." And so there they sit, passing their time in heaven, waiting for Henry to come up. And the book is organized as the tales of three of the people who are sitting there with Eleanor. One is Henry's mother, one is Abbot Suger, with whom she was just speaking, and another is a man called William the Marshal, who is a knight and a very honorable, upstanding person during the time that Eleanor was married to Henry. Back in heaven, periodically they move back to their spaces on the clouds, and right at the end of the book, of course, Eleanor and Henry finally are reunited in heaven. This is a very well-written book. It's very easy to read because the language, as you can tell, feels very contemporary. Eleanor is a very modern kind of a person because she is so clear about what she likes and who she likes. It doesn't feel like you're reading about someone from centuries and centuries ago. It's an interesting story through which to learn a lot of history. The one thing that's going to make it challenging potentially are the actual historical figures and the kings and the queens and the characters, the religious figures, and just keeping everybody straight. But if you're interested in this time period in actual history, this is a great read. It's going to go pretty quickly for you, and I think you'll find it interesting. The other book I want to share with you today is called The Book of Three. It's by Lloyd Alexander, and it's the first book in a series called The Chronicles of Prydain. Prydain, P-R-Y-D-A-I-N. This series is based, that's Lloyd Alexander. This series is based on a character called Taran, who, when the Chronicles of Prydain and the Book of Three begin, is working at a place called Caer Dallgren, as a pig keeper, an assistant pig keeper. His job is to look after a very large white sow named Hen Wen. He would much rather be out on horseback in the woods, participating in high adventures, like a character he has heard about named Prince Gwydion. And as the book opens, he's complaining a little bit to Dallgren, who owns Caer Dallgren, and is wanting very much to leave this job as the assistant pig keeper and get out into the world. And so Dallgren is speaking to him as a wise older man, and saying that there are serious things going on out in the world, and it's better for Taran to pay attention to his job right now than to worry about being somewhere else. So here's a little passage from the beginning of the Book of Three. "What you do not know," Dallgren said, "is this. It has reached my ears that a new and mighty warlord has risen, as powerful as Gwydion, some say more powerful. But he is a man of evil, for whom death is a black joy. He sports with death as you might sport with a dog." "Who is he?" cried Taran. Dallgren shook his head. "No man knows his name, nor has any man seen his face. He wears an antlered mask, and for this reason he is called the Horned King. His purposes I do not know. I suspect the hand of Aran, but in what manner I cannot tell. I tell you now, for your own protection," Dallgren added. "From what I saw this morning, your head is full of nonsense about feats of arms. Whatever notions you may have, I advise you to forget them immediately. There is unknown danger abroad. You are barely on the threshold of manhood, and I have a certain responsibility to see that you reach it, preferably with a whole skin. So you are not to leave Caer Dallgren under any circumstances, not even past the orchard, and certainly not into the forest. Not for the time being." "For the time being," Taran burst out. "I think it will always be for the time being, and it will be vegetables and horseshoes all my life." Said Dallgren. "There are worse things. Do you set yourself out to be a glorious hero? Do you believe it is all flashing swords and galloping about on horses? As for being glorious, what of Prince Gwydion?" cried Taran. "Yes, I wish I might be more like him." "I fear," Dallgren said, "that is entirely out of the question." "But why?" Taran sprang to his feet. "I know if I had the chance—" "Why?" Dallgren interrupted. "In some cases," he said, "we learn more by looking for the answer to a question and not finding it than we do from learning the answer itself. This is one of those cases. I could tell you why, but at the moment it would only be more confusing. If you grow up with any kind of sense, which you sometimes make me doubt, you will very likely reach your own conclusions. They will probably be wrong," he added. "However, since they will be yours, you will feel a little more satisfied with them." So that's a taste of the Book of Three. Of course, within a chapter, Taran has run out into the woods chasing Hen Wen, the white sow who was broken away, and he ends up joining Prince Gwydion, his hero. They have another friend named the Princess Eilonwy, and this is a picture from the Disney movie The Black Cauldron, which is based on these stories. And you can see that these three characters are going to be pursued by some pretty wicked creatures, many of whom will remind you of character types you've encountered in The Lord of the Rings or in even Harry Potter. It's a great adventure, just the beginning of a great adventure that's not strictly historical, although it is based on some old Welsh legends, and this makes some of the names a little bit complicated. I would say that's probably The most challenging thing about reading this book is just getting your mouth around some of the names. Once you figure out how to pronounce them, then you're off and running. It's a great story, and it is a high fantasy adventure of great intrigue and feats of arms, and I think it makes a nice addition to your group of 6 or 7 books to choose from. So I hope you have a great time with your Middle Ages Book Club. Thanks for letting me spend some time with you this morning, and have a super weekend. Bye now.